and where's our margin. So it's really a margin conversation every time we talk to a partner. So that's what it is.
Yeah. Okay.
I would say the same thing in the sense that a lot of service providers, they do want choice. And if you're just like, hey, we're only stuck on AWS, then you're kind of stuck with whatever AWS is being given. And when you're talking like the tier one service providers, they do have a choice and they want the choice. And they might even have their own data centers, or they're like, hey, we have a tight partner with Microsoft. And we only want to be on Microsoft, or we have a tight partnership with AWS, and we only want to be on AWS. So our viewpoint is for service providers, they should have that choice to deploy the software where they want to. They already have a lot of existing software in that data center, and if you already have all your software in Microsoft or whomever, then you want to be able to have everything tightly coupled together. So.
Yeah, I mean, telcos are really, a lot of them want to control. I mean, they're operators that have networks that they've built for years and years and years, and that's they feel like their core competency. That's changing. It's telco is probably the last function to really embrace cloud. And rightfully there's security, there's regulatory concerns. I can't go into the UAE and say, yeah, just put it in the US data center. It's just not going to fly. So either in country or in their network is a requirement in countries. But operators are relaxing, and we're having conversations about, all right, what functions are you ready to move to a cloud? Maybe it's the analytics that I spoke about before. Maybe it's what I call a trailing edge function, where I don't need to have that level of control like a voicemail or messaging platform. I think Allianz has had some good success with some of those non-strategic, analog lines and overhead paging and stuff like that. That I don't feel like I have the resource to devote to manage that sort of legacy product suite, and it makes sense for me to let that go. So it's very nuanced response. It's not all.
Let's switch over to mobility. So much going on in the mobile world. We've got 5G, we've got new generation, always a new generation of Wi-Fi. We've got satellites in the air that are getting closer to us. DP, what are you doing at Cisco to help service providers realize or benefit from the next generation of mobility?
Yeah. No, I think, look, mobile has been around for a while, and I think Mike had a slide on, mobile is one of the key drivers. Almost every service provider conversation we have globally starts around the CapEx investment, the spectrum investment they made in 5G, and what's the business case and how do they drive. So it will be application-led. I think the change this time around is from a business model perspective, what we're seeing is more and more, if you look at WebEx calling and what we've done with it, service providers have said you can run WebEx calling in the cloud at Cisco, and then we're partnering. What we've done, and going back to the Broadway days, is there are lots of service providers that have integrated the platform into the IMS store, into the actual network. So to build true differentiation as a service provider, you need the network, you need the device, you need the cloud layer that we provide. So our strategy now is very much to partner with service providers. One of our most successful offerings with Verizon, we have OneTalk, where it is a mobile-led service or a mobile-first service targeted the SMB. Very successful because you come in and you lead with mobile. It adds mobile subscribers to Verizon, so they like that. But then we run the platform in terms of what the underlying UC component. So the $2 version of that, now we have WebEx Go and WebEx Mobile, where we partner with the service provider and say, for the needs of the market, where almost everyone leads with a mobile phone, like everyone has a desk phone, but you lead with a mobile phone, what are the applications and business models that you drive from a mobile-first communication? I think at Cisco, that's probably our biggest push. So we're starting to see more and more service providers that we're deploying with WebEx Go. We're also starting to see upmarket in the enterprise, not just in SMB. Enterprises are now starting to say in certain verticals, financial services, legal, public sector, I want all calls to go on a work number. So then you need to say, how do I secure it? How do I provide recording? How do I provide transcription? Then WebEx calling, what we're saying is we can do that with the service provider. we integrate into the core network, and it also allows service providers to differentiate, right? When you keep the calls on the network, on the mobile network, you have the ability to say, unlike a pure play internet hopping service, you are Verizon or Orange or Telstra. Like Telstra has a very successful service called Liberate, powered by Broadworks and by Cisco. That's the same model, but we see it moving up market. Enterprises, almost everyone, and depending on where in the world you are, the company-provided mobile phone versus the employee-owned phone is a very big difference. Almost all of us have our own mobile phone. It used to be before your company gave you because you were cool or you were in sales, but everyone has a mobile phone. So now what we're doing is we're saying on the second SIM on your phone, iOS and Android, we provision the business line. And that allows the enterprise to say, you know, I'm Dave, as I said, I can manage that service, I can be compliant, I can be secure. Very different from saying, Elka has got a mobile, I can call her and chat with her, but when we have a work conversation, certain verticals are pushing, leaning heavily into this with us. That's where we see the huge revenue opportunity for service providers.
If you see that photo of me on that wall, 12 years ago, I was on TechCrunch Disrupt. I was much younger then, had dreams of big things. And during TechCrunch Disrupt, never forget. But, you know, we actually were talking about building connectivity into the IMS core. Because the reality is, over-the-top apps, no offense to Microsoft Teams, if I'm on a Microsoft Teams over-the-top app call, it's awful. And that's nothing to do with Microsoft. It has everything to do with the actual network and how the data is not prioritized over the voice and stuff. And so we've worked with multiple carriers to build a tight integration into the IMS core so that your over-the-top app is not just necessarily going through the data network, but the voice is actually going through the voice part of the network to ensure call quality and stuff. And these are the kind of things that, you know, we're constantly trying to push the boundaries of bringing all the different types of networks out there kind of, you know, together. Just because an over-the-top, you know, native app, or not native app, an over-the-top app in general just doesn't seem to be very good on the data network and stuff at this point.
Yeah, I mean, you've chronicled this. I'm sure you'll talk about, you know, the sort of native mobility versus OTT. And I'll give a plug to Teams Phone Mobile. And one of the things that Azure for Operators bring is that glue into the IMS network between the Teams platform and the operator network. So we're working on that as well.
Any comments, anyone?
Yeah, maybe just one more. I think one thing to keep in mind here is markets mature. It's natural for, I think, operators to pull from multiple solution providers. One thing that's important in that, though, is operator strategy around customer ownership, brand equity. And I think one of the things that Alianza brings to the table in this conversation is for customers that are being maybe pulled into an environment where they're now putting another brand forward, a Microsoft brand forward, a Cisco brand forward. Alianza is giving them an option to maintain the service provider brand. In that type of, whether it's a mobile offering or a fixed offering, maintaining, you know, that customer relationship that's been important for them for a long time, and not necessarily, you know, waving the white flag and saying, all right, I'm ready to become the, you know, the dumb pipe that everybody's talked about, we're just reselling or becoming a channel partner, but really still maintaining that customer relationship with your brand forward.
I do think, I mean, one of the things to clarify from a Cisco perspective, it's always a service provider brand. It's sometimes it's co-branded, but it's Vonage, it's, you know, Verizon, it's Telstra. What we also see is sometimes you co-brand, but at the end of the day, your point about customer ownership, right? Like if you lead with access and connectivity, you own the customer and then you're overlaying apps. So I think customer ownership becomes a key thing, and that leads into, okay, cost of customer acquisition. In certain segments, it's service providers are better, in certain segments they're not. That I think is going to be an interesting game going forward. Where do you buy the service from? Is it from a vendor? Is it from a partner? So that's also where I think there's a lot of opportunity for service providers. I'm very bullish on the future for service providers going forward.
I'll just add one thing. You know, I think there may be some CCA surveys, some other survey in the Washington data, but about, I think Frost did some reporting about the loyalty a small business has towards the operator versus the larger business. And generally the larger business, it's, you know, the pull is the Cisco or Microsoft. That's who they have more the affinity to than the SMB. So talking about lower cost of acquisition, if you are aligned with one of those known trusted brands in the enterprise, then that's going to reduce your acquisition costs and you can get more pull. The SMB, where the operator has more sway, they can bring a bundle, they can simplify that. So there's some nuance between markets.
Patrick, I was just thinking, you made the comment about TechCrunch. 2600 was one of the first to integrate. I think it was the Sprint, wasn't it?
The OGs. Yeah. So if you guys don't know who Sprint is, don't worry about it.
That's what they are.
Yes, exactly. You learn a lot about how everything works back then. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, the reality is for service providers, your number one asset is your name. And so if you're just reselling someone else, then eventually you're just going in at cost or you're going to lose in the little grand scheme of things. So, you always have to keep your name and, no offense to Microsoft. But the reality is if, try to set up an auto title using your Microsoft Teams, I can't, so I don't know anybody else who can. So you still have a ton of opportunity to work with, I wouldn't say, hey, let's not sell Microsoft, let's not sell Cisco, let's not sell any of them. But you come in with everything under your own name saying, hey, we've done an integration with Microsoft, we've done an integration with Cisco or phones. But this is still my name and this is still my brand. And that's the only way, you're going to be around 10 years from now. And if you're just fully like, hey, I'm a Cisco provider, no offense to Cisco, eventually you're just competing against all the other Cisco providers. And that's something to think about is not just where you're at now, where you can be in 5 years from now, and where you can be in 10 years from now. So.
Excellent.
Dave, quick question.
Sanjay.
Maybe for DP, for anybody. The mobility, US versus international. Where do you see the differences, if any?
So I think
The
the
question's about the differences in mobility internationally versus domestically.
Yeah, I think we're almost like it's the 2.0 version, right? I think 1.0 with GSM, Europe, back to Sprint, I think originally Nokia dominated the market. So I think international was ahead in mobile. But I think in terms of 5G, both from a spectrum, I think public policy and regulatory, the US is ahead. Is that your question?
No, I mean, like this notion of a mobile dialer is sufficient, the dual SIM or that.
I think international, well, we do a lot, Telenor, all the Scandinavian operators are our partners, whether it's Telia and the others. So when you talk to European operators, it's not a conversation of is mobile, when mobile. They're all in on mobile. It is mobile first. So now they're looking at how do we drive more ARPU out of mobile? How do we get to enterprise? That's where the second SIM, one of the services. So if you look even at the services we provide on, I would argue that what's pushing the WebEx app further on mobility applications is some of the work we do with our Scandinavian operators from just an actual differentiation in the market. So they're further ahead. In terms of integration into the network, we're integrated already with Verizon, with AT&T and stuff. I think now it's a go-to-market conversation on how do you market the service. So is it just if you just say, do you want a second SIM? No one knows what a SIM is other than people in the industry. I think it's a question of are you selling business services? Outside the US, I think Telstra has a very successful service with Liberate, very mobile-centric service on how they go to market. We're now working with a Japanese operator as well. And for them, it's very much actually a mobile service because it's very app-centric, right? So from that perspective, we're seeing operators lean into how do we leverage the core network? You talked about like in differentiation. It's not that US operators are behind. I think the market, like in Europe and other places, is much further along. One big change, I think, between US and other markets is the US operators have the muscle to lock the SIM in most cases in the US. Hurdle of adoption, friction in the customer acquisition process. Europe with its GSM routes, all SIMs, all devices open. So you have the ability to go in. That's a big customer acquisition. How can I create a frictionless experience? That is, I don't know if it's an advantage. It's just the way the market is and how it evolved. Did I answer your question, Sanjay?
I do want to get some more questions from the audience, but I want to get this question in first. Michael mentioned that the industry is mature. I thought it wasn't brand new, but, he says it's 25 years old and it's time to reassess things. So, earlier, the platform choice the service provider made was all the difference in the world. Question is, does it matter now? Is there really any difference between the platform vendors? I suspect you guys think there is. So let's start off with Chris.
Yeah, one of my early jobs before joining a vendor was as a CLEC. So I came up in the CLEC boom in the late 90s, and it's either Nortel or Lucent. And I think platform does matter, but really at the end, it's about execution of that operator. So, my company, didn't go bankrupt, and we survived and we did well, not because we chose Nortel over Lucent, just because we were very focused and we executed. So all of us here, like I said at the outset, have successful customers, and that's really at the end of the day, that's what matters.
I mean, obviously, platform does matter in the sense that, if you want to kind of land and expand your opportunities, you want to make sure that your platform has all the features and functionality that you need. But the reality is, you're not stuck with one platform. And so if you have an existing platform, and you have customers that are looking for more like WebRTC, or they're looking for some type of mobile offering that you can't currently do with your current platform, technology has gone to the point where you can kind of mix and match things together and stuff. So I think platform matters in the sense of what your target audience and what you're aiming for. But the reality is, you really can, kind of mix and match things based on your go-to-market opportunities.
So I think from a Cisco perspective, platforms do matter, but it's so much, if you look at, again, back to where does the service provider make money, is what can you do with the platform and how do you create value on top of the platform. So a lot of the conversations we're having with our partners is, obviously we believe Webex is the best platform out there, but we talk to partners, it becomes a question of what are the value-added services, what is the differentiation, and it's really, as you see, it's cloud connections, as you see this migration to the cloud, there's also a movement of the margin contribution changes from where the margin pools are. So as you move the margin pool into the value-added service, where it wasn't about Fios, it's about the Netflix service. If you look at who's got margin, I think that's where the platform matters. If you lock yourself too much into it's about the platform, then I think there's not enough room for service providers to make money and to be profitable. So our emphasis really, talk about APIs and what can we provide. So we're seeing more and more service providers working with us on saying, how do I leverage your contact center APIs, or how do I leverage your CPaaS to build value on top of your platform? So it's not just a one platform, it's what can you do with the platform? Obviously, we believe there'll be 2 to 3 major platform players, which is why very much we view Webex as a platform where you have calling, you have meetings, your contact center and devices, and then we work with the partner to say, okay, we know where our margin profile is, but are there other pools of margin that we can jointly own? So I think it's really a question around where is the money flowing, and how do we enable our partners to get their fair share of it, while we as a platform provider also get part of the margin. Right?
Agree with everything that's been said. I think how I frame it maybe just slightly differently. Platform decision does matter, but it matters less and less all the time as an industry matures. Early in an industry, platform differentiation is a feature comparison that we all did, this platform versus that platform, and which has the most features and how do these line up. And even you kind of see that today in some of the different web meetings and cloud meetings platforms, which one has breakout rooms, which one has recording, which one has transcription. As the market matures, the different experiences that the platforms provide at that granular feature functionality level will be undifferentiable. And I think over time, whether it's a Teams meeting, a Zoom meeting, a WebEx meeting, it's a URL. And we all click on it, and we all have the ability to jump into any one of those meetings. I think the differentiation from a service provider perspective is in the delivery of that feature functionality. And that differentiation does matter. And fundamentally, whether you're managing a multi-vendor environment versus managing a cloud app that under your brand is a different experience for you. And I think this comes down to service provider strategy and how are they going to differentiate their business going forward? Do they see owning and operating a platform as a strategic benefit? Does it position their products differently? I think the answer to that is over time, it's less and less so. And it's about how do I free up resources, mind power, energy inside my organization to think about go-to-market, verticalization, really meeting a customer experience need. And the calories and brain power expended on managing a network in a multi-vendor environment, I don't think increasingly as the market matures lend itself to differentiation and competitive advantage.
So we're technically out of time, but the next session, then I can wait. So I want to see if there's any questions in here. I want to open up if there's any questions. Any questions for our panel? Oh, please.
So we talked about mobile, but several operators have mostly fixed line businesses. How can you all help? Or what's the strategy? How can they play into the mobile side when they don't have, because most of the mobile is pretty much by the large operators, right?
Yep.
And we all know that we're using the UC apps more and more on the mobile side. Like meetings, everything on mobile. How can the fixed line operators kind of get into this?
So the question is, how can you help your service providers leverage fixed line services for differentiation? Is that
Yeah, how can they work with the mobile?
How can they get in, how can they leverage mobile without owning the mobile network?
Exactly.
Yeah, so perfect question. I think some of the stuff we talked about Webex Mobile and Go, and what we're doing is you see more and more service providers. You mentioned Lumen, they own the physical on the fixed line, but they don't own a mobile network, unlike a T-Mobile or which used to be Sprint and AT&T. Well, what we're seeing is you can launch a service that enables the mobile network without owning the core mobile network. So you're starting to see whole new services that can be launched. On the consumer side, you could argue WhatsApp has a very large base. They're a mobile service on a mobile device. They don't own the core network. They're able to build a brand. Obviously, it was a free service, so there's a question of economics. So I think we're starting to see enterprises now saying, I want a service that spans multiple mobile network operators. So by definition, you're abstracting the network layer. So we actually see, and we're working with a few providers, one of them is not even a telco, looking at entering the space of saying, can I come in and provide everything to do with mobile service, from billing to devices to cost management, and then provide this as a service. So I actually think you'll see more providers. You see Dish Network in the US, what they're doing with their 5G capability. They don't own necessarily mobile network. You're seeing more players. The MVNO word used to be a buzzword in the past. I think you'll see more of second generation services that are on a mobile network, not necessarily by the MNO. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that gets to the international question too. I mean, in Europe, France is a much more vibrant MVNO, MVNE ecosystem versus here in the US. I think that will evolve with more players, and that will open up mobility to more fixed providers.
But I think network economics are a very key thing. The challenge with the MVNO model is economics.
Let me see, is there any other questions? Yeah, okay, I'm sorry.
How do you feel the struggle with hybrid work, which is continuing between going back to the office, staying in the office? Can you hear anything about how that's affecting?
Yeah, is hybrid work just a buzzword, or is there actually something behind it?
Is anyone here not working today while you're remote from your office? So I think the world's changed. By the way, I just got a tweet that I guess the Republicans have introduced a bill in Congress that would, I don't know if force is the word, but strongly insist that government employees should be at work on site. So I think there are these trends and movements where people are starting to say, hey, let's go back to the old way of working. I think it's just changed. It doesn't mean everybody's sitting, on a beach in Fort Lauderdale working. It means that you're going to see the spectrum, but I do think we have changed fundamentally at a global level. I think our phrase that we use at Cisco is work is what you do, not where you do it. That applies more to the knowledge worker more than it is the front line. You can't be a barista from your home office. You have to be in the coffee shop. But I think globally, there's been a resetting of what it means to be at work. That I don't see changing, Jeff. But each country, each market, each vertical is looking at it in a different way, whether it's 2 days at work or some portion of the workforce. I think this has been the biggest boon to us as an industry over the last 2 years. But I think now the 2.0 version of it has even more opportunity.
And I think that's the opportunity for the service provider. I think I said at the outset, hybrid work is a buzz, but it is a reality. The enterprises, businesses are looking for, how do I align my estate now into these new requirements, right? I got all these fixed phones at an office that no one goes to. I've got a whole slew of home office workers. I know, it's kind of, I don't want to speak for Poly and HP, but I perceive they want to sort of be the home office enablers. So, you have an opportunity to bring the broadband connectivity, if that's part of your portfolio, and help the business say, all right, here's how you're going to right-size your business and save some costs from them in the process.
Well, with that, please, let's take my panel.
Guys, before you leave, we got
A picture.
Yeah, I'll be there. Yeah, we go.
We'll be signing autographs.
Yeah.
Right all day.
Ready, set, one more time. Perfect, guys.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for calling us. We'll try video.
Just write this agenda, please, when I said that.
Use it internal as being provided by one. Hey, Joe.
Okay. Yeah.
You get paid overtime to go to.
Okay, let's go ahead and start off with the next session on mobility. This microphone, I changed it.
There's no break.
Okay, I'll use this mic. All right,
No, we don't break.
so I guess I
Get a coffee then.
introduce myself. UCAS Mobility 3.0. And the old saying,
Get a coffee.
the old saying at Microsoft was, if you remember the early days of Microsoft, was version 3 was the one that mattered. You had to wait for version 3. And I think UCAS Mobility 3 is actually pretty significant. So let's get into this. My name is Dave Michaels. I've got here my Twitter handle. Evan, right in front of me, that's that cartoon below. Evan and I do a podcast, usually about 2 episodes a month. We've had 2 of our team. We've had Michael Tesler. We've had Thomas Frey on Talking Heads podcast. You can subscribe to Talking Heads for free on your mobile apps, podcast apps. We just posted one with Jeff Lawson from Twilio. We try to get, what we tell people is the most interesting people in the industry, plus we have good guests. Okay, so I also do a video with Zeus. Some of you know Zeus. We call it Real Time Reported, kind of a recap of news. We do it when we feel like it. And I published the Insider Report. You've been getting a couple of Insider Reports for this. I have a free version, I have a paid version, and my own brand is Talking Points. So with the Talking Points brand, last June 27th, I published a report where I started using the term UCAS Mobility 3. The report was based on an observation from Enterprise Connect in March of 22, that there were, for the first time, in my opinion, 3 keynotes that talked about UCAS Mobility 3, and it was the first time I'd kind of heard of this. So 3 keynotes, that was one from Microsoft, one from Cisco, and one from RingCentral. And so I published the No Jitter post on it, I published a research note on it, and I'm pretty excited about this. We see a lot of innovation in technology. We see a lot of innovation in unified communications. A lot of things are just easy to emulate. Blurred camera backgrounds or breakout rooms came up earlier. It's like once a vendor decides we have to add this feature, it's not that long until that feature pops up and propagates across the industry. This one's gonna be a little trickier. I do expect a lot of propagation to follow, but it's gonna be a little harder to pull this one off. So what is UCAS Mobility 3? Over the past 15 years or so, or I guess Mike would say 25 years, yikes. There's been two dominant themes in enterprise communications. The rise of UCAS, and I don't remember when we started using the term UCAS. You could probably remember we started with hosted voice or hosted PBX, and it gradually expanded. We had the whole prem to cloud conversation. We had what is UCAS conversation. The leaders all changed. I've got there Avaya, Nortel, Ericsson, Alcatel-Lucent. Cisco got in the game around 2000. Microsoft got in the game around 2010. Zoom popped out of nowhere. RingCentral takes credit for all of this. We saw voice data convergence happen. There was a big conversation. I remember Blair and I going back and forth on what is convergence, and what does it mean when all of a sudden your PC can make phone calls, and there were all this new ideas, click to dial, integration, CTI integrations, all kinds of new stuff popping up when this generation or this revolution started. We saw hosted voice expand into meetings and messaging. We saw WebRTC, which is mentioned here, that we can pretty much click to join any meeting now from the browser. And we've also seen broadband become ubiquitous. So it's been a very interesting journey. The rise of the smartphone started in 2007. The famous Steve Jobs launching the iPhone, it'll always be remembered. Again, we saw the leaders change. Anyone remember Steve Ballmer making fun of the launch of the iPhone? That it'll never work. Business users want a keyboard. This thing's doomed to fail. I understood where he was coming from. I mean, it made sense. I wouldn't buy a phone without a keyboard. I didn't know about touch capacitive screens. That had not been invented yet. And so the things changed pretty quickly. And we saw new stars, Apple and Samsung. And reality is that mobility has been a key part of the UCAS story for a long, long time. And the UCAS speeds, of course, the wireless speeds have gotten much better. So as a result, UCAS and mobility really go together hand in hand. We see a lot of phones now from the phone vendors like Cisco that are running Android. They don't say that necessarily, but they call it WebOS or WebXOS, something like that. But it's an Android-based system, and they're not the only ones doing that. We're seeing the form factors changing. Poly's got a monitor with a built-in camera, built-in speakers, built-in camera speakers and microphones, just like your cell phone has. So we're seeing this convergence, and you look at the screens, the pictures on these screens. I think it's just kind of funny because this stuff is really becoming very blurry, and we've had some questions in the last session about mobility itself. It's clearly we're doing more and more of our UC and UCAS on our smart devices. So how does the industry embrace mobility? Carefully, because we're in the communications business and the wireless providers are in the communications business. And there's a little bit of, we've heard it from everybody, right? You walk into oops, careful of that microphone. You walk into a prospects and they say, I don't even know why we need a phone system. Everything I need is right here. How many of you have heard that? I mean, we've all heard, yeah. There's a lot of confusion about what is the difference between these systems. So the UCAS industry embraced mobility, what I would call 1.0, and it was what I call creative call forwarding. Simultaneous ring was the killer feature. And so it's like you can take your call anywhere, and it was actually pretty clever. And it was pretty easy to receive calls this way. A little harder to make calls, but we had some pretty good solutions around that. I remember Mitel had a solution where you dialed into the PBX, and then you put in the phone number you wanted to call, then it would substitute the outbound caller ID so that the outbound call would show the work number instead of your cell number and stuff like that. But pretty creative call forwarding was generation 1. Now, I've simplified this down to 3 generations. If you talk to the mobile operators, they'll say it's like 37 generations of mobility. But at a big picture level, 3 generations. The second generation is largely where the industry is at today. Patrick made a comment about Teams. OTT doesn't work very well in that last session. It's not just Teams. OTT, over-the-top apps, don't work very well. They work great at home. I have a soft phone on my desktop, they work great at home. They work great in some coffee shops. They don't work particularly well on a smartphone, particularly if you're mobile. In other words, the UCaaS industry says our mobile solution works great if you're not mobile. And it really is the standard. Pretty much every UC and UCaaS company has some sort of app ecosystem or primary app that allows them to make calls, allows them to do messaging, allows them to do directory lookup, allows them to do meetings. And it works pretty well if you have great bandwidth. Now, a lot of you can relate to a situation I just had recently where I went to the dentist, got a phone call on my work number over the top, and it was a bad connection. It was just really bad. So we're struggling. And I said, well, let's try it again. So like, he calls me back and it rings again. And it's just terrible. And I said to him, just call me on my direct cell number. Have you ever done that? I mean, seriously, have you ever done that? We all do that. We basically, the industry knows it over the top doesn't work particularly well. And I wasn't even driving. If you start driving and your signal's just completely changing as you go up and down the highways, OTT just doesn't work very well. The reason OTT doesn't work very well is because it's over the top. It's not just over the top, the internet like we do with a lot of other apps. It's two over the tops. You've got to go over the top, unprioritized on the wireless side. And then once you get to the carrier's ground station, then it's over the top, over their internet. And there's a lot of delay there. One of the, I mentioned simultaneous ring. Sometimes you can't even answer your UCaaS phone because it rang 3 times on your desk and you only got half a ring on your cell phone. And so over the top is just lots of problems. And we put up with it because there's not a lot of choice, and it's the best we can do. And it's, like I said, the current default. So, let's see, let's see, did I cover all this already? That's not sufficient. Okay, we covered that, I covered all this, way ahead of myself. And the bottom line is, users skip it. That's the important part, because one of the big benefits, if you go into a UCaaS presentation, a UCaaS demo for one of your new vendors you're looking at, it's not going to take them very long to start pushing the mobile app. They're going to say, look what you can do. You can control your outbound caller ID. You can work from anywhere. You can do all these wonderful things, and it's a big lie. It just doesn't work because the employees reject it. They won't use it. This is, by the way, we could talk about what's it called? Net neutrality. Net neutrality really is just about pure internet, not so much about mobility, but it's the same type of thing. The carrier's network, the carriers get the benefit from a better network. The native, why does your native dialer work better than the over-the-top dialer? Because it's prioritized over the carrier network. It's built in. These smartphones, second word of smartphone is phone. These are phones. And we're asking our users, don't use it that way. Go into an app, start the app, and then use it that way. It's not even intuitive. So, big lie. UCaaS Mobility 3. So what's happening here is that the wireless carriers are working now with the UCaaS providers to help them create a better wireless service, a wireless experience. They're putting the UCaaS number natively on the cell. And DP talked about it, Microsoft talked about it, Chris talked about it. They're pairing it to a SIM, and it's the native number. You can now use the native dialer on the smartphone, or not. You can still go into the app and make calls that way. The app has more features. Maybe you want to use the directory or check something else. So you can use it either way. The important part is, while the app works, it's not required. It doesn't even require a smartphone, because every cell phone has a SIM, and so it's paired with the SIM. It could be a single SIM phone, it could be just a work phone, or it could be a dual SIM phone, and it could be a personal phone and a work phone. It's currently done basically in one of two ways, and I'm sure there'll be even more coming in the future. But right now, it's currently done with either a direct integration where the wireless provider is natively or in the background, in the back office, integrating with the UCaaS provider, or they're doing it with an MVNO. And the result is it's one comm solution for the customer that covers everything from desk phones to soft phones to smartphones. An admin for Teams can, with a new solution that was just announced from Verizon, can log into the Teams console and move users and move phones between any of these devices, any and or these devices. And it's completely native. So this is fairly significant. In other words, the lie that we've been selling for 2 decades is now a reality. And there's going to be some shakeups. So the benefits of UCM3, I don't know how to abbreviate UCaaS. UC seemed to work. That's a hard one. How do you abbreviate an acronym? So now we have an answer. Why do I even need a phone system? Well, we know the answer as to why I need a phone system, because you might have call centers, you might have various specialized use cases where a lot of your employees still need a company phone system. But we're asking customers to buy a phone system, a UCaaS solution, and we're asking them to buy a cellular solution. Now they can buy one solution, one vendor, one provider for everything. We're solving the BYOD problem. BYOD has been a head scratcher for a while. Who owns the phone? If the employee owns the phone, can we install software on it? We have rights to their call logs. It's just a whole quagmire of issues around BYOD. We solved that by two SIMs. The calls that take place on the company SIM, like in the WebEx example, are fully visible and tracked and logged in the WebEx portals. The calls that are made on the personal SIM are not. Employees understand this. Employees know that their activities are going to be tracked, and things that they want to be tracked will certainly be on the corporate side. This also solves the Disneyland problem. Once you give out your personal cell phone number, it's really hard to enjoy a day at Disneyland with your family. You have to keep your cell phone on because your family is going to get lost and they're going to call you, and you're going to keep on getting work calls. But if you can maintain the separation of work and personal, then you can turn off and go into not available on the work phone. It solves the BYOD accounting issues. The company will pay for the second SIM, not the first SIM. Solves the logging issue, solves the single device issue. How many employees still have to carry two devices so they don't want to put software on their phone? Solves the work from anywhere problem. It solves the intuitive use case. Hey, you could actually use the dialer to make a phone call. You want to dial a phone call? Use the dialer. Prioritize traffic and signaling, not over the top, so it's actually getting a pretty good experience. And I mentioned this earlier, you can use the native app or not. And it's actually interesting. There's an assumption people don't want to use the native app. There are times when the native, the over-the-top app, the installed app, has benefit. I mentioned the directory, or maybe I want to look at chat conversations or something like that. So people will use whatever they want. Opens up new opportunities for frontline workers. We've seen like Workplace by Facebook come into the enterprise. Basically, it's a chat app. We've seen a lot of organizations deploying chat apps in their enterprise, but they have no way of enabling a phone call. And so here you can mix and match, give everybody a messaging app, and give the people that need it a mobile app, a mobile phone call. There's also, Michael mentioned verticals. I just had a plumber come out to my house. And the plumbers are afraid to call you. They're running late or whatever. They're afraid to call you because they don't want to give out their cell number. This solves that problem as well. And so there's a lot of benefits to UC3. Now, some of the disruptive impacts here, as I mentioned earlier, suddenly there could be one provider. Verizon currently has a US exclusive with Microsoft Teams. Verizon doesn't even sell Microsoft. And so this is interesting. You have to buy your Microsoft license from somebody else, but we're going to see people that are on AT&T or T-Mobile that have Teams enterprise deployments, we're gonna see them migrate over to Verizon. That's the strategy of Verizon at least. Suddenly wireless providers are not just dumb pipes. They're actually adding a lot more value. When it's an over-the-top situation, they're just dumb pipes. This is going to accelerate UCaaS consolidation. We're gonna see a lot of companies, a lot of organizations want this feature. They don't really know it is available yet. It hasn't really been properly launched yet. I believe that this year that's going to happen. Microsoft and Verizon are two very big companies that like to spend money on advertising. I believe this differentiation is going to become clear this year. And the bottom point there is really important. For the first time ever, Cisco is using the MVNO approach. For this first time ever, Cisco is now in a position to be the single provider for a global enterprise for everything, for telephony, meetings, messaging, mobility, and hardware. So when you get that WebEx Go SIM on your phone, you get a local number, whatever country you're in. The top of your phone says WebEx. It doesn't say Verizon or AT&T. It says WebEx. And anywhere you go, it's going to work. The MVNO basically is a function of roaming agreements, and so that's a pretty easy thing to negotiate. It's not like the direct integration where they have to really do a lot of technical testing. It's more of a contract. I don't believe Cisco has global availability yet, but they could get there pretty quick. They're available in a lot of countries. Current offers. OneTalk. I got a big credit to OneTalk. It came up earlier. Surprised it came up. I didn't even knew about it. But BroadSoft and Verizon developed OneTalk several years ago, way ahead of their time. That was pretty much my understanding, the first UC Mobility 3 offer. Didn't really go anywhere. Nobody understood it, and Verizon branded it, and Verizon didn't know how to sell it. It's still available. It's out there. It works great. It came up earlier. It works great. It's not a full UCaaS suite. It's a pretty limited UCaaS suite, but it's the same value proposition: native number, smartphone, desk phone, and software. AT&T Office at Hand by RingCentral has this available today, and Cisco calls theirs WebEx Go. RingCentral's also announced a partnership with Vodafone in Europe that's rolling it out into many European countries. Microsoft Teams was already launched earlier this year with Telia in Sweden and Rogers in Canada, and now, of course, Verizon. More to come. Now, I can only talk about announced items here, but let's kind of go through the list. So we've got 8x8. They haven't made any announcements yet, but I'm sure they're looking at this. Crescendo in the room. Crescendo struck an interesting partnership last year with Mavenir. That was really around CCaaS. And, but Mavenir and Crescendo together have all the tools to create this. They won't tell me what they're talking about, but these guys won't tell me what they're talking about, and Mavenir doesn't talk. They don't. Okay, so Dialpad has not announced anything. I want to point out that Dialpad is resold by T-Mobile today, and T-Mobile is an investor in Dialpad, T-Mobile Ventures. Google hasn't announced anything, and they already have an MVNO. But they, and I doubt they will announce anything, by the way. GoTo hasn't announced anything, but they're actually pretty strong in certain markets that are very mobile centric. Vonage is an interesting one. Vonage, again, has not said anything publicly about this. But if anyone noticed, they got acquired last year by Ericsson. And Ericsson is the leader in cellular infrastructure, wireless infrastructure, 5G infrastructure. And Ericsson keeps making noise about how they're going to use Vonage to get into the enterprise. And Zoom hasn't made any announcements yet. And so AT&T has two solutions, one from WebEx and one from RingCentral. Verizon has Microsoft, T-Mobile has not said anything. Let's see here. So that's the end of my session on mobility, which is right on time here. I mentioned my insider reports. I got a new one going out today, as a matter of fact. It used to be monthly format, now they're going to go out more frequently. And I'm doing a promo code for CCA members. It's normally a $5,500 subscription for the premium edition, and doing a promo code through the end of the month for CCA 23. And thank you.
Thanks, Dave. And we lost Joe, so I'm jumping in here, right? So, anybody, there's Joe, okay. Too late, Joe, I jumped in. But I just want to introduce the next one. You know, when I prefaced this meeting there and talked about the economic kind of environment landscape, it's really interesting, really tricky. It's going to take a lot to navigate, I think, in the next few years. Might want to be the biggest obstacles or opportunistic kind of strategies that you have to navigate around in the next few years. So we're really excited. We were in Chicago and we partnered with Cavell. We had Jordan Rupar up on the stage talking about kind of, what do you have to do as a company to even be attractive for M&A, or what do you have to do to find the right companies to acquire. We have Jordan coming back, and then one of the partners at Q Advisors with Jerry DeHaven coming back to talk about really how do we navigate these waters on the economic standpoint and the M&A standpoint. So we're looking forward to them coming up. Joe, any other, while they're getting mic'd up, any other announcements or anything we need to
No, well, we had to pay extra to not have Michael Quinn show up today. So that was
I think Michael's living in Spain right now.
yeah.
But, and we have lunch right after this, so if you hold on one more 45-minute session, we'll give you a big break here at lunch and go from there.
Yeah, and at lunch, make sure to visit, our exhibition booths. Those guys, want to meet you. So make sure that. And if you're not going on the boat tonight, again, just let me know. So we have a couple more people looking for spots.
Yeah. So without further ado, we want to welcome Jordan Rupar and Jared DeHaven from Q Advisors.
Are we on?
Yeah, you guys hear us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Michael's in Valencia drinking sangria right now. It could have been more entertaining than usual if he was here. So good to see everybody. I'm Jerry DeHaven from Q Advisors, and this is my colleague Jordan Rupar. Happy to be with everybody today. I think there's a lot of interesting things going on in the space. Perhaps not as much positive news as we've had in recent years, but we think there are still plenty of things that should interest folks, or most folks in this room. So for those of you who don't know us, we're based in Denver. We've been around for about 21 years. We focus very much on the broader UCaaS, CCaaS, CPaaS ecosystem. And because we're such a dynamic marketing organization, we have rebranded as of January for the first time only the second time in our 20-year history. But this gives you just a general sense of what we do. And most recently, we've been very involved in the Microsoft ecosystem. We're going to announce a deal probably in the next 2 weeks, a multinational deal that I think will be meaningful to a lot of folks in this room. We've been busy the last year divesting all of Intrado's assets, that many of you have probably partnered with over the years, from FlowRoute to OnZip, to their health and safety business, to their wholesale business, to a very large Cisco installation as part of an Apollo divestiture. And I think, to Mike's point earlier today, which I thought was a great presentation, I think there's an accelerating focus on all things CX, which we'll talk about as we go. But I think what we want to do today is maybe take a brief look at where things are and talk about what we think is ahead, or what folks in this room should be thinking about relative to any capital market activity.
Yeah. And so naturally we'll kick off. Most of you guys care about one question. And this question we've gotten, over the last 10, 20 years we've been in this space. But that question is, what is my value? And more recently, that question has been, what is my value in the current economic environment? And it's always a tricky question for folks like Jerry and I to answer, because we know the higher the value we give you, the more likely you are to hire us as bankers.
He never did.
But in all seriousness, it is a tricky question. And for you folks who didn't attend the last conference in Chicago, we got to all kind of experience the sad chart of 2022, which is the chart showing a drop not in just the S&P 500, as we all know, of 20% over the last year, but in what we call the Cloud Comms Index, which is comprised of actually a few different segments. So you're probably thinking, oh yeah, RingCentral, 8x8. We all know those bellwethers, once bellwethers, dropped substantially. But this index is actually composed of CCaaS and higher growth customer engagement platforms, as well as CPaaS. And Twilio's probably been a little bit over-penalized, I think, over the last 18 months or so. But the big thing I like to highlight, and what people quickly forget, is where these companies were trading, and even 8x8 and RingCentral, where they were trading just 12 months ago. And as an example, RingCentral was trading at, call it the mid-teens. I think they started off 2022 at like 17 times revenue. And as we all know, private companies have never traded that high. So now we've kind of come down back to earth over the last 12 months. And you'll see here where revenue multiples have kind of come out. And if you look at, UCaaS, it's on average 3.5 times revenue is where they're trading today. CCaaS and customer engagement have always been a little bit higher. And we see that in private markets as well, as they trade a little bit higher from a revenue multiple perspective. But one thing's changed probably most drastically over the last 12 to 18 months is what we've talked about multiple times, and we've seen it in other technology markets, but a focus on not only growth and revenue, but profitability. And if you look at that same index, that Cloud Comms Index we just went through, and you pull out just the unprofitable companies, over the last 12 months, they have actually dropped, or they've almost lost 80% of their value. And keep in mind, a lot of that's coming from the once bellwethers, or still bellwethers, 8x8, RingCentral, and some of the others.
Yeah, the other thing I'd say is, for better or for worse, it looks like it's stabilized a little bit over the last six months. It hasn't stabilized in a place that shareholders are probably very happy about. And I think for a lot of us in the space, I think it's a long road back for a lot of these folks to where they were. And this chart is really just to show the profitable companies are quote unquote outperforming their peers, meaning their stock hasn't declined as much. But the big takeaway from this should be that there's real focus on the fundamentals, EBITDA and free cash flow. The folks that aren't profitable, have been laser focused on growth at all costs, have been actually penalized the most. And this is more broader market commentary, right? The Rule of 40 is critical and omnipresent in our discussions with clients as it's ever been. And for those who don't know what Rule of 40 is, it's a combination of your EBITDA percentage and your growth percentage. So investors right now very much focused on smart growth.
Yeah. And so all of this sounds like doom and gloom for valuation, and you may be thinking M&A as well. And M&A actually last year was down over 20% year over year. And Q3, Q4 data hasn't quite come out. I think some of it just came out this morning. But it was down even further, and it was pretty abysmal. Part of that was there's a lot of volatility in the debt markets. There's people are kind of waiting and seeing. And then you have the public buyers taking a complete step back because their stock prices have been hammered. But one thing to keep in mind is that private equity is a huge market. And when I say that, I mean the amount of capital that's been committed to be deployed, but hasn't yet been deployed. And that's at 2.5 trillion globally. And this capital has to be deployed at some point in time within the near future. It can't sit there for 10 years. So we think this will be a big driver of M&A going forward. Now, if you look at private equity data, the last couple of quarters, it was down. And that was primarily due to the debt markets kind of being volatile. And we talked to a lot of firms and they said, we're gonna wait it out, especially some of these larger deals. It's really hard to get any kind of loan syndicated because typically private equity will put some debt on a transaction. We're gonna wait it out a couple of quarters. Well, we think this year, we're gonna see more movement in terms of private equity having to deploy, but kind of deploying more toward high quality assets. And the definition of that now is revenue growth and profitability, and not just EBITDA profitability, but to Jerry's point, free cash flow. And an easy way to measure that is just EBITDA less CapEx. And most of you guys probably have a very CapEx-like profile. We're not fiber providers, we're software providers. So that's kind of a no-brainer. But private equity over the years has grown from being just a fraction of overall M&A activity to over a third. And we expect that to pick back up this next year as compared to the last couple of quarters.
So this just shows some examples of some activity and folks who've been active for years. You know, to Jordan's point, there has been a real flight to quality, particularly the private equity community now, not, you know, historically not as speculative as the venture community, but even less so now. We're also seeing a pretty big uptick in cross-border activity, you know, with folks like Apax behind Belgium-based Destiny, you know, Thompson Street, who's behind BCM1, who we work with, I think, on 5 deals. All of these companies are looking globally today, but I think the real focus here is, as Jordan said, is that for those who are looking at the markets, particularly with scale, and had thought maybe a private or a public option was something near term, they're retrenching and they're looking at inorganic activity to continue to grow and find bolt-ons while they wait for both public markets to settle as well as perhaps the debt markets to come back. I do see this. Just shows you how dynamic our space is. I saw last week, Anywhere 365 is on here. I don't know if they're here today, but we did see an announcement that they're actually in market today. So that's an example of one that's not waiting. But I would say it's also an example of a company that's active in the Microsoft ecosystem and sees that the activity for that specific space remains very robust.
Yeah, and I can say that there are 2 companies on here. I hope I'm not skinning it down too much, but they should announce acquisitions in the next month or so. They're working on. So still very active, not just PE, not just for new platforms in the space, as we saw with the 2.5 trillion, but they are deploying that through their existing portfolio companies, as we can see on this page, Jerry's point. And then this is the lovely convergence chart. We think just general convergence will continue to happen. It's been happening over the last decade. But there's a very prominent shift toward more customer engagement and employee engagement applications. And we've worked, as an example, with Destiny a ton over the last, call it 24 months. And they've made a very deliberate push from starting out with, hey, we just want scale, and we're gonna create this pan-European provider, to we are actually acquiring technology, and we're acquiring very specific technology around chatbots, AI, Microsoft Teams enablement, all of those things in order to give them an edge when they're selling to a mid-market enterprise. Another trend we expect to continue to see is folks like Ericsson, Verizon, some non-traditional players in the space continue to push into UCaaS and adjacent sectors via M&A. And then another area I think is really interesting is the shift toward kind of vertical focused solutions. You know, Microsoft bought Nuance and kind of spun it as a healthcare play. It's actually an AI play as well, and I think that's, you know, obviously playing out well for them. But other players like Savio have made a very deliberate push into vertical focused applications and also kind of ticking the boxes for some of the more innovative employee engagement or survey type acquisitions as well.
So Mike had I thought a great slide earlier, the dark cloud slide. That was good. We get that question a lot. Is now the time of the dark clouds dissipating or growing? And I think it depends on what you do and who you ask. But the comparison, to go back and look at, the recession of 08 and 09 compared to now, there's some very significant differences. And I think it should, it bodes well for most of the folks in here. There was a forecasted reduction in IT spend during the recession of 08 and 09. And, even as we went into, this, whether we define it as a recession or not, I guess it depends on which politician you ask. But, even over the last couple of years, there's still been a projected increase. And I think that, we expect that to continue. I think, that fourth bullet in terms of modernization and what that means to your specific models, I think figuring out, your secret sauce as it relates to your target customer base is going to be critical. There are plenty of opportunities for growth. And as Jordan said before, there are plenty of opportunities for private equity investment, provided it's not Me Too, and that you've got a very defensible business plan that includes profitable growth and free cash flow.
Yeah, and as an example, I mean, we talked to a private equity firm last week, and they were telling us that it's harder than ever to get a new platform investment through their investment committee. Just the number of boxes it's got to check. It's got to be profitable. Does it have a defensible customer base that's not going to get hit during a recession? Is it, is an ARPU a certain amount of, is it a truly mid-market as an example? And so the voiceover is, hey, it's harder than ever to get a deal done. There's this flight to quality, but we have to do deals in this space. This is a space that we are focused on, enterprise communications, and help us please find quality assets so that we can deploy capital. So I think we'll see a lot more of that over the next year.
So that's a look at trends, activity.
And then, so what is my value? What is my value in the macro environment? Things that changed 12 months ago, or things that valued you 12 months ago at a premium, have changed today. The second question is that we often get is the timing right for me to go to market? And before we embark on a process, we typically go through a number of questions with our clients, because it's a really, really bad idea to just start talking to an investor and have no idea what your objectives are, what you're trying to achieve, or if you have shareholders that maybe have differing objectives. One's an older person that wants to sail away and they maybe own 60% of your company. How do you manage that if you want to continue on with the business and really grow it? So the first question is, what are your objectives? Full liquidity, partial sale? Do you want to bring on an investor that has other portfolio companies and experience in the space? We can talk about that more in a bit. And once you figure out that first question, the type of transaction, which Jerry will talk on in a minute, kind of works itself out. And oftentimes we can kind of run a process where we're targeting two different types of transactions, and you can kind of weigh the pros and cons once you get term sheets in. And then the last two are really, how do you prepare? And there are certain things that people don't mention that you can start now, just from an organizational perspective and how you think of your business, just tweaks, just little habits, 2023 New Year's resolutions in order to get you in better shape, say if you want to run a process in 2025. And then lastly, how do you actually maximize your value? And we'll go through that in a minute.
So, it's never as black and white as you think going into these processes, particularly when we consider, a strategic sell-side engagement versus a capital raise versus, perhaps minority or a debt raise. And I think for us, a lot of our activity is actually in those, two middle boxes, a majority equity deal or a buyout. Primarily because it allows our clients to really vet the market and decide if they want to stay in, keeping in mind that private equity's target ROI is 3x for the first 3 to 5 years post deal. And so for our clients, the question is, how bullish are you about your model? How do you feel about this partner? And do you want to hedge your bet on yourself and take some chips off the table now? I think, debt financing lately has become a little more challenging, particularly for CapEx heavy models. We see that more on the fiber and general infrastructure side. But it's still, historically, capital is still less expensive and debt's always less less expensive than equity. So again, it's, foundationally, where's your business? How important is it to have liquidity now? How important is it to maintain your equity? Because at the end of the day, your equity value is the most important component to your cap table. Minority equity, a lot of folks go in thinking, well, I'll bring in a minority investor, I'll keep control. Control isn't really control as you think. Governance changes the second you have an institutional investor in there. The difference between your governance and owning 51% versus 60 or 70 or 80, it's going to change. You're going to have a new partner. So it's really important to vet those prospective investors, to really understand what the future looks like. If you've been running a business independently without institutional investors and doing board meetings informally, well, life's going to change shortly after you take money in, and that can be a good thing. And for the most part, it should be a good thing, because the private equity firms that are focused on the space know it as well as everybody in the room, and hopefully they're a value add to the strategy and the people you want to bring on to your business as you grow.
And we can't emphasize more that partnership, and this group that you essentially get married to. Partnership is a really big deal, and sometimes it can go really, really well, and we'll talk about that, and sometimes it can go sour. So it's really important that, outside of the numbers, the highest value, all of the hard stuff where you're like, this is why I'm running a process, so I want to take chips off the table, highest value, et cetera. It's important as well to pick an investor whom you get along with and that importantly shares your vision. Because when that goes well, it goes really, really well. And these are a couple of case studies talking about a stage deal. And so what do we mean by stage deal? Stage deal can mean that maybe as step one, so 2023, you sell a minority, 30% of your company. You bring in a private equity investor, and maybe over time they put more capital in, but at the end of the day, you accelerate growth. And at that second event, which let's fast forward to 2026, you actually end up selling the company to a big strategic. The fact that you still own that company and that you've been able to grow it that much quicker results in much bigger enterprise value. You own a piece of a much bigger number, right? And so this kind of talks through a couple of case studies or previous clients of ours where they had come to us and they said, hey, I'm considering selling today. And we actually ran a dual process and said, okay, we'll talk to some folks that would buy you at 80 to 100%. And we'll talk to some folks that maybe would put a minority in or maybe give you some debt. And you roll a significant amount of equity and get a chance for a second buy later on. And so the first case study is a client that we had probably 6 or 7 years ago, cloud networking provider. They took a little bit of debt and minority equity and ended up doubling or 2.2 times the value that they would have achieved had they sold day one. That was over a little less than a 3-year period.
Second example is a little more extreme, a bigger bet, but this is an example of going back to my earlier comment about how bullish are you about your team, strategy, your go-to-market success that you're having today? How confident are you that pouring gas, meaning capital into that model, will increase the value of your business? And in this case, we helped a client raise some money. They rolled 100% of their equity. And the benefit to them, or the difference between what we raised money for and what they sold, was 14x. And that's a real life example and one that didn't happen too long ago.
Yeah, so the deal we did with them, I think it was 2019, $45 million was the value. And we completed a deal fairly recently and the value was over $600 million. And so they own 30% of 45 versus 30% of 630. So it can end up being a pretty beautiful outcome. And then beyond just transaction types, I think a lot of people don't realize that you can actually get started today, just from an organizational standpoint and prepping yourself for an event, whether that's a full sale or maybe you just bring in a partner as a minority or majority partner. And some of these just evolve around organizational KPIs. The rule of thumb for financial is if you aren't audited or don't have a review or a reviewed set of financials, then we typically will recommend a quality of earnings. And what a quality of earnings is just, as most of you folks probably know if you've been through any kind of process, it validates kind of your revenue down to EBITDA. And a lot of times we'll come up with an adjusted EBITDA number, which should ultimately increase your value. Some other things to track now and get started on today are just your different revenue categories from different types of MRR, UCaaS versus maybe CCaaS and other types of value-added channels that you're selling into your client base. Breaking those out and doing the work on the front end is really important. And then just tracking your customers, and a really important stat that has not gone away in terms of its prominence is just number of services sold into your base. And you can break that down from, circuits sold, licenses from Office 365 to voice licenses to, if you're reselling Five9 or something like that, or your own contact center solution, but really kind of tracking the number of solutions that client's buying from you. And then translating into that as an average across your base in terms of number of products sold per customer. Other things, obviously, minimize concentration. It's great to have a couple of big customers, but at the end of the day, that'll actually work against you. As long as they're staying, and that's another kind of don't in a process is, don't forget to kind of go through your customer contracts before you run a process and make sure they're all in good shape. Too many times we've gone through a process where it's like, their largest customers coming up for renewal and we get to confirmatory diligence and we're a couple weeks away from closing a deal and that customer comes up for renewal. And you can only guess how, where the negotiation is sitting and who has the power when you're 2 weeks away from trying to sell your company. And so that has worked out very unfavorably and can kill deals, which we'll talk about in a bit. And then the last one is operations, and I'll let Jerry touch on that one.
So there's a lot of conversation about providing more visibility and more analytics and data intelligence about what we're all selling to our end users. What shocks Jordan and I frequently is that companies don't take the same internal approach. And we're all laser focused on how to build product and build visibility and analytics for a customer. But you've got to look internally and apply the same data analytics to your customers and your entire business. There is an armada of diligence professionals waiting for you after an LOI. Everybody has a big celebration when we sign an LOI, and then they find out the real work just began. We ran a beauty contest and we picked a winner, but it's post LOI where the real work starts. And so, taking a very analytical approach to every element of your internal data, organizational, operational, sales, customers, and really spending time preparing for that is critical. And I think more than ever before, and probably more than, if I look at the bullets on this chart, the last one there in terms of security, compliance, and data governance is paramount. Every private equity firm in the world today or sponsored company has fund covenants where there's a whole new set of diligence that happens around this topic. So if you haven't spent any time thinking about it or having it audited, it's a critical thing to do ahead of a process, and it's something that folks like Jordan and I dig into pretty quickly when we're talking to prospective folks. And the other thing I say in terms of process preparation, obviously you got to know your key vendors, but there are really important people in your organization who may not be shareholders in your organization who are going to be critical to any process, and buyers are going to figure out who's critical to a successful integration and transaction. And if those folks aren't shareholders, make them stakeholders in the transaction. Give them a reason to stay, because the second it becomes public knowledge that you're being acquired, there is potential risk of employee flight. And you want to make those folks, feel like there's, a soft and welcome landing for them, not only with the buyer, but through the process, because is painful at times. And so, I can't emphasize that enough. And obviously having a project team that's going to lead the transaction, and that's both internal diligence and also presenting to prospective buyers is important. So these are the things that we suggest you prepare for. And now we're going to tell you a few things that happened. Oh, we did get the blow up. Cool. Now we're going to tell you a few things that happened when perhaps you don't. So tax liabilities, not properly billing or collecting them and deciding it's optional to remit them is a problem, and is not one that isn't going to come out. But getting your tax house in order, having a tax consultant, absolutely critical. The amount of scrutiny that regulatory taxes get today, not just in the U.S., globally, it's a pretty significant focus immediately for prospective buyers and investors. Forecasts. Don't be a company that's been growing for 5% a year and suddenly show a 30% uptick the year after you're going to sell the business. It's tough to defend. And also, when you're working with folks like Jordan and I, we're going to spend a lot of time. One pole in the tent is always a financial model, making sure it's defensible, making sure it can stand the test of time, making sure you can stand up to the scrutiny it's going to get. So once you've spent 4 to 6 weeks working with your advisor to make sure it's ready for prime time, don't go out and, let's say, hire 20 people that weren't in the forecast and not tell us. That just happened. And then, typical stuff like making sure, we talked a little bit about this before, but making sure you've got a handle on your customers, understand your total contract value, understand who might be coming out of customers, understand if there's risk there, get ahead of the story. Sometimes the question is, why now are you selling when things are going well? Hey, you know what, we need help. We need help with our customer account management or retention plan, but you've got to be ready for what's going to happen, and not knowing the potential, especially large customers churning, is a pretty impactful revelation as we go through a process.
Yeah. And then Jerry already mentioned some case studies, but it's almost embarrassing, but there are things that you can prepare for, and people, just refuse to kind of prepare. And this first one is a tax example, and we actually caught it before we went to market, but we found out that our client, is a smaller UCAS player. They were collecting and not remitting, and so the tax liability was massive, and we recommended that they hold off to go to process, and they still have not sold the company yet. So once you do that, it's a little bit hard to recover, and it can put off the process for quite a while, as long as you catch it before you get to confirmatory diligence with an investor. NPS scores, this seems trivial, but we actually had a deal die 2 weeks or maybe a week and a half before signing and funding because of bad NPS results that came back. And what happened is our client had never taken an NPS score of their base. They had never done a customer survey. They had essentially no pulse on their customers, but they had great financials. They had 40% revenue growth, 40% EBITDA margins, own technology. It was just a perfect baby. And the buyer decided to do NPS because they put a lot of weight on it as a company, and the results came back awful. One woman in a written response said that she hated the CEO and she was planning on leaving, and she had no idea why she hadn't left yet. It was abysmal, and thus they backed out of that deal. Again, we had been through months of diligence, and this one item, which we could have easily avoided and controlled, ended up killing the deal.
Moral of the story, customer surveys are important.
They're important, yeah.
All the time.
Yeah. And then Jerry mentioned the financial forecast miss of just a complete, the client just at his own, just woke up one day and decided to add 20 people over a span of a month or two, but right in the middle of a process, which can mess up your kind of financial messaging to investors.
Yeah, and you don't get to redefine what EBITDA is during the process. You don't get credit for synergies you see and the buyer doesn't, or the buyer expects to realize you can't throw back your marketing costs entirely because you wouldn't do it if you were them. So there's a lot of, and Jordan and I spent a lot of time talking about this, but especially as the process goes, the EBITDA definition doesn't change. The adjustments to EBITDA don't increase or materially change once you start. And the same thing with valuation expectations. Staying sober about your valuation from the beginning and not necessarily reading the headlines and applying those valuation metrics when you see somebody that's a $500 million company that's trading at 15 times EBITDA and you're a $5 million company, so you're worth 15 times EBITDA. It doesn't work that way, and it doesn't certainly change materially once you go to process. And the last piece here is just understand, and I said this before, there's a huge contingency of legal, financial, HR, security, technology, consultants waiting for you the second you sign an LOI. So, be sober about what's coming and make sure your team is as well.
Yeah, we had a client recently not want to share vendor names. And this was a few weeks ahead of closing, and that deal ended up crumbling, and it was a fantastic deal. So I'm fingers crossed it comes back this next year. So in summary, I don't know if you guys recognize this character. Some of you may be too young, but I think most of you probably saw this movie. But this is American Psycho. And the first thing is,
He was an investment banker.
He is an investment banker. If you Google him, you will get bloody face images. It's very gruesome. So
This was the tamest photo we could find.
Yeah. But first thing is pick your advisor wisely, not just your banker. Don't settle for that guy. But pick your advisor wisely. Pick your counsel wisely. You don't want an overzealous lawyer involved that can end up killing the deal by 1,000 cuts. And you need to be completely open with your advisors, your banker and your legal, as Jerry was saying. Tell them the good, the bad, and the ugly. We can help you be kind of your best defense in a process. And so we want to know that on the front end, and we'll typically invest quite a bit of time on the front end to get to know you and your company, and even personal things that can end up impacting a deal are important. And then the next is valuation and process, and Jerry talked about this, but a big thing here is avoid a one-horse race. I'm sure a lot of you guys have companies and you get called on, emailed by junior folks at these private equity funds all day, every day. And maybe one comes through and there's a flyer and it's just, wow, I love this value. There could be a lot more in that term sheet that can get you later if you don't fully kind of run a process, talk to a couple of other parties, just avoid a one-horse race. Just because we've seen that fail more often than not, and a little competition is always a good thing. And then organization, take honest inventory, like we were saying, start now. I mean, even if you don't run a process until 2026, start now and get kind of the back office in order. Some of you who are a little bit smaller, you can even hire a part-time CFO or outsource that, but I highly encourage you to put a little bit more structure around your financials and customer data if you haven't yet. And then create a defensible growth plan. I think as a rule of thumb, if you're not running a process, you really don't need to create a plan, and you don't have a private equity investor already, you really don't need to create a plan more than 1 year out. But if you do run a process, make sure, to Jerry's point, it's not a hockey stick, and people don't look at you like you're, taking some happy drugs and growing faster than the rest of the market. And then what to expect. It's really fun, being in a process is really fun. Like, you feel like you're the prom queen, and you get 6 or 7 term sheets, and everybody wants to be your best friend. But once you get that term sheet or a few term sheets and you go into confirmatory diligence, things get pretty serious pretty quickly. And it's not only a lot of your time, but it can be very emotionally challenging. It's topics, dealing with key people, key team members that have maybe been with you for 20 years and, what's going to happen after this transaction, things like that, and how to protect them and items like that. And then, just having that understanding and being prepared ahead of time just makes the process so much easier. And really, it shouldn't be more than 4 to 5 weeks. We've seen, up to 2 months in confirmatory diligence. But, the more organized you are, the quicker it should go. And your banker will typically push for a very short timeline. But all in all, expect a very challenging but truly rewarding experience. And this year should be an interesting one from an M&A perspective. We certainly think it'll pick up. But really checking those key boxes in terms of what makes you valuable is key to not just getting the value, but getting a deal done. And that comes full circle back to revenue and profitability and some of those key things we talked on at the beginning.
I think that's it.
Yeah. Any questions for anybody? Yeah.
What's your take on Avaya?
I watched my
Not much.
Fair enough.
That's for your telling.
I'm curious if you can comment on the value of contracts and how they're changing with like pay-as-you-go models or pay-per-use. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is, there's revenue, there's pipeline, and then there's predictable revenue for a buyer, right? And so, we typically see 3-year contracts. Being able to calculate your TCV, your total contract value is critical. Understanding, where they are in their, in their tenure, and if they're getting close to expiration, if you've got visibility into what's going to happen. And for the pay-as-you-go, it's a little bit more dynamic. And so knowing your customer tenure versus, their contract and if they've been there for 3 years, that's a little more predictable than somebody that's been there for 3 months. So, getting both sides of that equation. If you don't have a contract model and you're all pay as you go, then, really having, I would say 2 things are really important. One, assuming you've got tenure, understanding and being able to demonstrate when the customer started and show that they've continued to be there. And 2, knowing what the addressable market is and what your growth has been during this addressable market opportunity, and if you're aligned with what the growth within, if you're aligned with, if the market prognosticator says 20% growth and you're growing 20% in a pay-as-you-go model, then that's an important data point to be able to demonstrate. Yes, sir.
Is there anything different about, I'm just gonna call it a market downturn because I really don't know what else to call it right now, but is there anything
That's a good one.
about this market downturn or compared to previous ones that would maybe affect valuations or affect the process a little differently?
Yeah, I think, there's a slide there before that showed, the difference between now and 2008 and 2009 is that, we still continue to expect global IT spend to increase. So at a macro level, your customers are probably, frankly, more impacted. So I would say there's one, potential driver that, could affect the positive forecast of that 6% look over the next couple of years is, whether or not you're selling into verticals that might be, more negatively impacted. But in general, there's still a pretty bullish view on IT and, those again who are executing. It's blocking and tackling now. There's no, there's no more, hey, RingCentral's 20 times, I'll take 10 times. I'll take a 10 times multiple. It's every deal is about the fundamental analysis on how profitable you are, do you have free cash flow, and are you growing? And if you are, we're seeing still record EBITDA multiples.
And I think to y'all's benefit, you guys are part of the flight to safety, flight to quality, just in where this sector tends to play in enterprise communications. It is, by definition, it's somewhat recession-proof. If a call center lets go of a number of employees, there's typically technologies that'll come in and probably buffer there in terms of automation and AI. And so I think just in terms of what we're hearing in the market, talking to private equity investors, for instance, of where they want to focus, which is security, customer engagement technologies, analytics, you guys kind of naturally fall or can grow into those sectors very easily. And so I think that helps just broadly this conference, everybody attending this conference in terms of where the market might go for the next 24 months. But I think in summary, nobody thinks it's going to be catastrophic. But you can't really predict the bubble.
Yes, hi. You mentioned an uptick in international transactions. At the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned a Belgian company, and I saw British flags on one of your slides as well. Which regions in the world are you seeing an uptick in? Is it Europe? Is it India? Is it Latin America?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll chime in and then you can as well. So we, as a firm, we do a ton in Europe right now. But to answer your question explicitly, I think part of that is because of the activity within Europe, and specifically over the last 5 years, buyers from the US or funds in the US wanting to invest in Europe. Europe has typically been probably 3 to 4 years behind the US in terms of just its consolidation plays. There are certain parts of Europe, like Scandinavia, that have always been more advanced than other European regions and the US, like Scandinavian regions for mobility as an example. But what we're seeing consolidation is really in the markets across Europe. If it's a US acquirer, they want to get to more mature markets. So it'd be buying a company in the UK or with the biggest office in the UK, English speaking, or the Netherlands is another example. If you're already in Europe, markets where people typically want to go, say if you're a UK-based provider, you want to get into markets like Germany, because it's this huge untapped market, and Germany as a whole has some incumbents, and the cycle to migrate to the cloud has been a bit different than the rest of Europe, where the penetration rates are lower. So there's some opportunity there and some interesting players that could transact over the next probably 12, 18 months.
Yeah, I think we're a little biased in Europe because we've got
Yeah.
an office there, and I see Matt back there, so, we met Matt a while ago, and he helped us with some of our thinking around it there, but, with the exception of the UK and Netherlands, the state adoption rates are still 3 to 5 years behind the US, so it's a fertile target for US companies, but conversely, there's a lot of technology, right, particularly mobile, that comes out of Scandinavia and the Netherlands and Israel, so, we see money going both ways. We just sold a company recently to Vitruvian in Texas. Vitruvian's a London-based private equity firm. We see it going, in both directions now. And at the end of the day, the short answer is it's the cloud, and the cloud has no boundaries. So, we're all, for us, we've got to be global.
Yeah.
But Matt's a good resource too.
Yeah, for Europe, Matt Cavell,
Yeah.
Other areas, Latin America has gotten some interest as of late. It's, with the currency and some of the states of the economies, just depending on where you're looking, if it's Colombia, Argentina, Brazil, they all have very, very different characteristics. But that's another area. And then we've seen a lot of interesting companies pop up in APAC, namely of late, Australia, and others. So we expect consolidation to continue and things to just continue to get more global as people specifically stop looking necessarily for scale in their home market and more differentiation globally as like a differentiator from like a footprint and service capability standpoint.
Yeah, I just wondered if during looking at or watching the Avaya question was for estimating your time to talk.
She let me answer that one, didn't she? Yeah. All right.
So while you were giving this great talk, I just got a question from a reporter asking about RingCentral's layoffs. And they want to know if it's because of, if they're facing the same, macro issues that everyone else is, or if it's something else. And I'm assuming it's based on profitability, just based on part of what you said, but are layoffs basically because of profitability?
I
think, and it's not unique to RingCentral, right? We've seen a lot of announcements, and I think there's, going back to the flight to quality, I think there's a flight to profitability and the, growth at all costs, just, the street is saying that doesn't work anymore, and we're going to reward, more fundamental analysis. I mean, there'll be some exceptions, but I think it's a long road back for some of the folks that were trading in 15 and 20 and 25 times revenue, and I think Microsoft and kind of a resurging Cisco have have a lot to do with what we're seeing from, Ring and 8x8. Apparently they're getting together anyway.
Yeah, and if their growth rate comes down, which I think a lot of analysts are projecting, they really do need to spit out quite a bit of profitability to have that make sense. I mean, and they're big now. I mean, these are huge players. So, and to a point made earlier about no greenfield, it's like, where if you're a scaled UCaaS provider, what should your growth and profitability be, and we're however many years into this cycle for this space, unless if you go out 559 or a higher growth industry, you kind of got to rebalance. So I think that's part of it. And then just tech layoffs in general, I feel like it's contagious. It's like an excuse and a cop out maybe sometimes for, once one tech company does it, it's easier for another to tack on that trend. Anything else?
Great.
All right, well,
Thanks,
where to
everybody.
catch us, we'll be here.
I'm sorry?
We got a picture.
Oh, sure.
We got a picture.
We're gonna break for lunch. We'll be back here at 12:45, quarter one. Thank you. And visit the exhibitor booths outside, please.
So you can help us out with that.
So we'll be returning live right after lunch.